Welcome to Rock That Relationship, a podcast about all things relationship with Corey and Tracy.
Now let's get real and start creating relationships that rock.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rock That Relationship. We are really excited to be here in this season talking all about differences in relationships and really kind of navigating when you have different perspectives, different ideas, different values, and different approaches to things. And so we're really excited today to have Dr. Beth Bisbey, who's a clinical psychologist and an accredited GSRD therapist with us today. Talking all about open relationships and polyamory. So thank you, Dr. Beth, for being here today. We're really excited to have you.
It's my pleasure. It's good to be here.
Awesome. Well, maybe you could start a little bit by telling us about your background. And you're a GSRD therapist. And you know, what exactly is that? So what do you do and what drew you to the work that you do?
So I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm also a gender, sex, and relationship diversity therapist, an accredited advanced gender, sex, and relationship diversity therapist, which means that I work with people who have alternative lifestyles. So LGBTQIA, people who are non-monogamous, and people who are interested in kink and BDSM and live lifestyles to incorporate their kink and their BDSM. So I developed a specialty in that. So that's what that bit is for. I also have a specialty in trauma and the treatment of trauma. And how did I get here? Well, I started out my career working with a mix of trauma and sexual trauma, but I also am part of the community that I work with. And so realized that there really weren't that many therapists doing sex and relationship work with people who were living in alternative lifestyles. And so although I was doing some relationship therapy more generically at the time, decided to do some more time focusing on, sex and relationships and gender that don't fit the norm. And these days, I spend most of my time working with that population and very little time working with people who identify as heteronormative.
That's awesome. And do you do a lot of that virtual, or do you see people in person?
Well, I see most people virtual. I have autoimmune disease, so I'm sensitive to viruses and whatnot. So I don't do a lot of in-person stuff. I tend to save my in-person for intensive therapy work, retreats, and speaking, because I do a lot of speaking around the UK at the moment. And so, I save my in-person time for that.
Awesome. Well, I mean, you definitely do work that is so needed as you're talking about filling a niche of people needing support, needing guidance. And, you know, maybe you can start off with, you know, someone like me who, you know, isn't really in, I would say, in any of the kind of lifestyles you're talking about, or, you know, you talk about polyamory, ethical non-monogamy. You know, these are terms that I've heard, I kind of understand a little bit, but I'm not totally familiar with. And some of our listeners may want to have a little bit more idea about what is it. So can you tell us what is polyamory, ethical non-monogamy? What other forms of open relationships are there? And how are they maybe different than just what I grew up with, which was like dating around, right? But now there's like a lot more kind of ideas, a bigger picture, conceptual ideas about this.
I mean, dating around still exists, right? I think one of the things that people do a lot these days is assign themselves identities really early on before they know anything about who they are. And then get themselves in a pickle because they create their entire, community around their identities and then discover that that's not who they are. And then it's all the big to do. So I spend a lot of time, I end up talking to two populations primarily. One is the over 40s because I'm 61. So me talking to older people makes sense, but I also talk to, lots younger people. So people in their 20s, and really spend a lot of time advising people to stop putting themselves in a box so quickly. So non-monogamy is anything in which people don't pledge to be with one person romantically and sexually. Non-monogamy is the umbrella term. It's the opposite of monogamy. monogamy means just one partner. There are all kinds of non-monogamies. There's some people who have an arrangement with their partner that maybe once a year they're going to do something sexual together with other people. Like they might go to a swingers club or to a sex party or to a dungeon just to try something and do it maybe together, or maybe they give each other a hall pass and, you can go and see, belies my age. I don't know if you remember California Suite. Okay, so this is
it's not even age. We're like vanilla nerds. Okay. So
this was a vanilla nerd movie. All right, so I'll try something else. But it's this sort of idea. There have been like a lot of books and movies based on the idea of people who meet once a year. And they have a relationship that goes on for years, through marriages, through all sorts of things, and they meet once a year. So there are some people who have an agreement in their relationship that they'll do that. There are some people who are swingers, and that means that they like to engage in sexual activity with other people. There are a lot of flavors of swingers now. There used to be only one or two. But the crucial bit here is usually that they start either as a couple or singles looking to spend time with couples. And it is primarily around sexual activity and enjoyment, and not around creating ongoing emotional relationships. And then there are people who are polyamorous, and polyamorous people have more than one relationship. So these are relationships that include emotions, and often have more than one romantic partner. So the romantic part, the sexual part, they'll have more than one partner. I've got 2 long-term partners. I am married to one of them, and I'm with the other in various forms for quite a number of years as well. So we would class ourselves as polyamorous because there's feelings. There's lots of feelings involved. But all of these are things that are consensual. We don't tend to use ethical non-monogamy anymore because who's to judge ethics? I think that's always a real ethical is always a real trigger word for people. But we use consensual non-monogamy. So, people are consenting to this. So affairs do not fit into this category because people aren't consenting.
And when you say consensual, you're talking if you have a married couple and the one is going to have a relationship outside of the marriage, then the other has to be consenting or knowing of that, right?
Yes. Otherwise, it's an affair. Otherwise, it's an affair and it's non-consenting.
Do you think that this kind of differences in like what people like and want has been a constant throughout human history, and that like the kind of heteronormative 1950s, you're married and that's it, you have kids and you live in this house, is like not really as common, but it's societally enforced, or at least it was for a long time?
I mean, I do think that there's been non-monogamy throughout history. There's no question that there is. And there are cultures in which non-monogamy is the norm. And they're not all cultures in which men get lots of women. There are cultures where women get lots of men. So, people always assume when you say, some form of polygamy that you're definitely talking about, older men who get to sleep with lots of younger women. But there are cultures where it's one wife, many husbands. So there's always been other forms of coupling and uncoupling around. But I think now that people are more aware of it, you're seeing more of this than you did in public. I'm not so sure that the population of people involved in non-monogamous relationships is higher. And we don't have a way to find that out because we didn't ask the right questions years ago. So we don't have a way to find that out. And I'm not so sure. I think media and social media make it seem like everybody is non-monogamous these days, but that's not my experience in dealing with people in the world.
Wow, that's so interesting. And as you're talking about all the different ways in which people express themselves in these non-monogamy situations, like, kind of, and I know maybe there aren't any statistics behind it, but the idea is like, is it more common for like a person who might be, well, let's say polyamorous, right? Someone who, like, maybe even in your situation where you have two partners or two people you would identify as romantic partners. Is it more common for a person to have, like, their partners also have partners, or are they just sort of monogamous, but there's a polyamorous person, or are they involved with each other? I mean, I know that
all of those are possible. I think less common are a group of people involved with each other, living together. The one you see on TV all the time is the throuple, right? Mm-hmm. And that's less common. I'm the therapist on a show in the United Kingdom called Open House, the Great Sex Experiment, where we took couples who wanted to open their relationships up, and I see them and they get introduced to a bunch of people and they get up to some opening up, and then I see them again to help them with the process of opening up. Some of them choose to leave the retreat and stay non-monogamous. Other ones have chosen to go back to monogamy. It's an interesting process. So there's a lot of people who are interested in trying and checking it out. But whenever people come to the retreat, like, the first thing you always hear is somebody will say, "Oh, I'm looking for a throuple." And they don't really realize what that means. Mm-hmm. That means, getting another person to come be with you full time,
right? Mm-hmm.
Which is actually really difficult to manage.
Why? Because it's three. It's because it's you. Three. Like, I had two sisters growing up, right? And there was always 2 against 1, always, no matter what. Like, it didn't matter. Our ages were like 3 years apart, but there'd always be 2 against 1. Never. Yeah.
3's an awkward number.
Mm-hmm.
3 is an awkward number. I tell people, if you're trying this for the first time, go for a foursome. People are less likely to feel left out. Mm-hmm. If what you're going for is trying sex with your partner, with somebody else for the first time, a foursome's much easier to manage because you're less likely to, and if you're left out, it's 2 of you left out. And so it's not as big a deal, right? It's right. Much more cumbersome when you've got 3, and creating a relationship between 3 people is harder. And most people don't actually want full-on, full-time relationships, but that's all they hear about. So they think that that's what
you mean. They don't want a full-time relationship with anybody, or they don't want it with, like, an outside person.
They don't want it with more than one person. I mean, a full-on, full-time relationship with one person is hard enough.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of dogma around it. You'll hear people say all your relationships should be equal, which is ridiculous, because if you've invested time with somebody where you've had kids, where you have a house together, where you've worked through bad times and good times, you're obviously not going to put that relationship on the same stage with the same priority as you would a relationship that you started last week, right? But there's a lot of stuff focused on making sure that single people don't get treated badly by couples who aren't really looking for full-on relationships and stuff. And it really is, when you're creating more than one relationship, you recognize that you're investing time, energy, and effort. If it's going to be anything more than sexual, even if it's sexual, you're still investing in it. But if it's going to be anything more than sexual, then you're investing time, energy, into it. And so you need to be really clear on what you've got to offer and what you're looking for from any partner, not just the partner that you don't choose to live with. Some people don't choose to live with anyone.
But yet might have partners, but they just don't live with them. Uh-huh.
But they don't live with them. So it gives you a lot of scope to change the way in which you do romance and sex.
Okay, so, like, what we were kind of focusing on for this season is, like, differences, how do couples navigate differences. So let's say you have a couple who's been together for a while, a number of years or whatever, maybe they have kids, maybe whatnot, and one partner wants to open up the relationship. Do you see a lot of that? And I mean, I imagine communication is crucial, as it would be in all of these situations, right? But, like, should the one who's not really interested take that offensively? I mean, they can take it whatever they want, way they want, of course, but, like, someone wanting to see other people outside the relationship, does that diminish the first relationship?
Well, it shouldn't, but it depends on how people approach and why they're approaching to have other relationships. The fact that I love more than one person doesn't diminish any of the people that I love. I was never looking to replace my person with somebody else. But monogamy indoctrinates us into thinking you can only have one. And because you think you can only have one, then the automatic thought, if somebody says they'd like to see someone else, is they're looking for my replacement. Mm-hmm. And so it can be very difficult to get your head around that if you're not interested in seeing anyone else. It's going to feel like your partner is telling you that you're not good enough, that they don't want you anymore, that they, and right. So the only way to do that and have that work is to handle it really carefully. But we also have to look at why people are looking to open up. There are healthy reasons to open up and not healthy reasons to open up. So a healthy reason might be that you, want to explore your sexuality more. And you're limited with one person. I mean, of course you are. You're limited to, particularly around gender, for example. If you're monogamous with one gender and you would like to explore something else, maybe you're bisexual and you want to explore something else, you can't do that within the confines of a relationship, monogamous relationship. Or you're just looking to explore kink and your partner's not interested in any of that. Those are reasons that people might want to open up. People develop friendships as well that turn into relationships. All of us have done that at some point or another in our lives. We've ended up dating somebody that was a friend. It's a great basis for a relationship. So that's another good reason. Sometimes somebody, just develops feelings for somebody because they've gotten so close to them and they want the physicality to be part of that. The not good reasons are like when people decide to try to open up their relationship because things aren't going well, just like they decide to have babies when things aren't going well, thinking the baby will fix it. Mm-hmm. If your relationship with your partner isn't solid, it might seem like seeking to get your needs met elsewhere would be the way to handle it. But you need to handle whatever's not solid first, because if you're not working on a solid foundation, it will go boom. It's not an easy one to come to terms with if one of you wants this and the other one absolutely doesn't.
Okay, it's very interesting. I just watched the Ashley Madison documentary. Have you seen that?
I haven't seen the documentary, but I know that.
Yeah, it's great. It was a service for people to have affairs, right? Married people to have affairs. Yeah. And then they found out it was mostly men looking for that. And, they had various couples on there, right? And so one couple, the wife was not aware of what her husband was doing. Later on, she obviously found out and they did a lot of therapy and recovered from it, but then ended up, back in a monogamous relationship. But then there was a couple on there that they did not want to ever get divorced. They really loved each other, but they had kinks or other things they wanted to do with other people. And I thought it was so interesting because they were so healthy, because they were like, the guy's like, well, I don't want to do those things that she wants to do. And she was really into like dominatrix type of stuff. And he's like, she's not doing that to me. But he had no issue with her doing it to other people. And I think he also dated as well. But then they stayed very like intact as a married couple. I thought that was so interesting.
And I mean, that can work. It's about it. There's where the communication is important. And jealousy is a thing that happens. It's one of the biggest issues when you have non-monogamy brought into any relationship. But jealousy is mostly about people having problems with their own self-esteem and or having problems with their where they feel they're comfortable in the relationship. They don't feel solid in the relationship. So if you feel secure in yourself, but you don't feel like your place in your relationship is secure, you'll get jealous as well, even though you might feel fine about you. And so once you deal with those two things, jealousy doesn't really become a problem anymore. You get things like envy, like one person's out having a good time and the other person isn't for whatever reason. And so you can be envious, you're doing all those new things with person A and I'm stuck here at home looking after the kids. And again, those are things that you can work on with communication. Some people are naturally monogamous and some people are naturally non-monogamous. And when you have a mismatch there, that can be a bit more problematic.
Right. I'm a total monogamist. And it's like, it seems in my like blood, right? Like,
right.
I just couldn't handle it. I would be an insane person. Either way, right?
Well, you get jealous about lots of stuff. So
no, but like even when I was having to break up with somebody that I was with for 8 years and we contemplated staying together and I was seeing, you know, I had started to see somebody else and my ex was going to work abroad and I was like, okay, well, I'll still come there to see you at Christmas. And it just it was too much for me. Like, okay, well, I'm with this person now. Hey, person, I'm going to visit the other person. And she didn't actually have a problem with that, but emotionally I did. Like I couldn't deal. And now all three of us are friends, right? And I'm friends with my ex's wife, but like, I don't know, for me, it feels that it's like, it's part of like just who I am, you know?
Yeah. In which case, if you were to come to me as part of a couple where the subject of non-monogamy had come up, you know, I would be saying, this is going to be much more difficult for you. Do you guys really want to try and do this? If you're naturally monogamous, the only way that you can be comfortable with your partner being non-monogamous is to be really on top of the feelings part of things. And that often takes a lot of reassurance, and making sure that, you know, you're still prioritized and making sure that the person isn't like going crazy, excited about the new person they've met and just sort of dealing with that. And it can be done. And there are couples. I wrote a blog post some years back. Is it possible to be in a relationship where one person is polyamorous and the other person is monogamous? And that still remains the blog post that I've written that gets the most hits to this day, because that's obviously an ongoing issue for people. And what I say is, yes, it's possible, but it is hard work.
And in that kind of situation, are both the original two partners having to do that work?
Yeah.
Or is like the onus on the non-monogamous one?
No, both of you have to work on it because it won't work any other way. So part of it is doing your own personal work. And so one of the things that I see a lot of is that people have not done any personal work, any real personal work. And if you've not done any real personal work, then you're going to find dealing with all relationships a little bit more challenging, but certainly dealing with anything that's non-standard more challenging. And so sometimes I'm saying, well, you guys need to each do your own personal work. You need to sort out your own insecurities, and because that's stuff that no amount of reassurance in the world is going to help if somebody's really insecure in a situation. It's just not going to work. Because that's an individual thing. But then there's work that you do as a couple. You have to get your communication to a level that's really working. You have to have really clear agreements as to how this is going to happen and what's going to happen. Because you have to remember that you've got one person who can't even maybe can't really understand why. There's sometimes a situation where somebody's monogamous, but they totally get non-monogamy and they're okay with it. But a lot of the times it'll be the person who's monogamous is like, it feels to me like what you're telling me is I'm not okay and I'm not good enough. And so you're doing a lot of work around that. So you have to have really clear boundaries on what you can manage and what you can't manage and what you can agree to and what you're not agreeing to. And both partners have to be clear that that's not something you can't send somebody out and say, okay, you can go and have a relationship. And then 3 weeks into the relationship go, oh, I can't stand it anymore, because then you've got another person that you've injured. And people forget that. They're like, oh yeah, no. You just close this down. Just end that relationship. I can't deal with it. It's got to be worked on really carefully.
It sounds like a lot of prep work. Like it's before entering into it, the best way to do it is to, in theory, is to work through all of this stuff. Do you, do you ever find that people have kind of gone down this road as more of like a justification for looking for like the grass is greener? Maybe it's like a 1 foot out of a relationship to say, if I find something better, then I'll leave what I have, but kind of under the auspice of polyamory.
I mean, I do see that happen, but I don't see it happen as much as people would think. You know, it's like the general, one of the things that people who are monogamous are saying is, well, this is never okay because this is what they're really seeking to do. And actually, it's hard to do that. People have affairs when they want to do that, right? They don't do it with their partner's consent and knowledge.
And that's like a whole other issue, right? So even if you have polyamorous couples, you could still have affairs, and that's an issue about that person just being a dishonest,
yes,
you know, right? Like,
that's how I ended my second marriage ended that way, because we were non-monogamous. We had a set of agreements, and he chose to have an affair, and you know, he broke all our agreements. He lied and did all the things that a person does if they're having an affair and they're monogamous. So kept it a secret, hid things, all of that. And that was just, I mean, that was the end of the relationship. It was like, you had a free pass and you couldn't even keep to the rules to have a free pass. So,
and that's like, okay, so that's just a breakdown of trust then between two people, right? So polyamorous people can have as many relationships as they all agree to have, right? But then it's like when something's just done without your knowledge, what does that do? Like, I mean, you're a clinical psychologist. So from that perspective, you find out that the person's lying or cheating. Does it just destroy the whole character of that person to you? Or a person doesn't want to be with someone who's untrustworthy, because if they're untrustworthy about that, they could be untrustworthy about so many other things.
You know, some people manage to repair trust breaches, but it is really difficult. And in my experience, the only people who manage to repair trust breaches, they've got a reason, they've got other motivation to repair it, like they have young children. Or their finances are in such a state where they know they're both going to be worse off in a really big way, or their businesses are tied together. Like there's some other reason besides their relationship to attempt to work through that, because they're so difficult to work through. They take quite a long time. And there's a lot of shifting the blame that happens in trust breaches that, you know, every relationship issue gets thrown on the affair, right? But there's also a lot of shifting the blame. There'll be a lot of, well, if you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have done that. And, you know, it's not an easy set of things to work through. It's like a tightrope in keeping keeping it clear what's gone wrong and what needs to be repaired. Because usually in situations like that, either you have somebody, there are people who just enjoy affairs. They like the secrecy. They're really attached to that exciting part at the beginning of relationships. And so but they had gotten to wherever age where they just didn't want to keep having serial relationships. So they commit to something and then end up going back out. And that's what they do. Working with that is a lot different than working with somebody where they surprise themselves by having the affair. Like something was going on at home and they didn't deal with it at home, and they got close to somebody emotionally. And that's often how it happens. They got close to somebody emotionally and then end up interacting sexually, having not cleared it. And, you know, so then you have to deal with the affair, which is where the attention is. But that person's like, but things weren't going well. That's how I ended up here. And it's like, yeah, but you've ruined the trust. So we can't look at what was wrong in the relationship right now. We've got to look at what's going on right now, because there's nothing to work on if we can't do something about the trust breach. So it's complicated.
Okay. So shifting to a couple they're monogamous, they're together, and then the one person's like, I want to go open this relationship up. How should they start that? How would that process? What would be, in your opinion, the best way to go about that?
Because it's so complicated, because one person wants one thing and one person wants something else, they should speak to a professional that works with non-monogamy. Most of us, see monogamy as a valid relationship choice as well. Right. Some of the times people are like, oh, I don't want to do that because you think non-monogamy is better. I'm like, no, non-monogamy is better for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It might not be better for you. So we're coming into it open, but it's important to see somebody who is open to the possibility that non-monogamy is a workable relationship style, and that you can have a relationship where one person's monogamous and the other person's non-monogamous. Otherwise, you're working with the therapist's bias, and that's not really helpful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a therapist. It could be a coach, but a trained coach. Again, like there are people who are sexologists who work in this area who are coaching and not really doing therapy, but again, they're trained. So somebody knowledgeable. And I say that right out the gate because trying to do this DIY is really difficult. It's a minefield. It's different if you're both going for opening up. I still think the earlier you have somebody help guide you through the process, like I've got DIY courses online, things like that, which ask questions that get you to think about various different things. You can start with something like that. But I think this is it's such a minefield that having somebody who has no skin in the game to help you with the process makes the most sense. And so that's what I would say.
I feel like that for monogamous relationships too. I feel like that for all new relationships. And some people like, when I say that, it's not that I think that, I do believe in therapy for everybody, but like you get into a relationship with another person who you don't know or understand. And a therapist is just an outside help, to help you navigate those issues. And I think, I think it'd be great if people are going to open up their relationships, just start right from the beginning with somebody who can help them. And so like when they're looking online, they would look for that GSR.
If you see GSRD, and then you can check with the therapist. If you're in the United Kingdom, Pink Therapy directory has a directory of therapists who deal with all these different things, and you just look for somebody who's got non-monogamy. In the United States, the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom, NCSF, they've got a list of therapists who are doing therapy. Some places, I think the APA this year is encouraging some form of way of noticing if a psychologist deals with this.
Are there specific questions you could ask a therapist? I know I always look for like trauma-informed therapist or something. And, on Psychology Today, like if I was to just Google choose a therapist in Tucson, that list comes up and then I can go through them. So some say trauma-informed, some say, like religious
I would straight out ask, do you deal with people who want to try non-monogamous relationships or are in non-monogamous relationships,
and just see what their response is.
Just see what their response is. And then you have to assess them the same way you would any other therapist, right? There are good therapists who work with this and there are not so good therapists who work with this. And it is just about assessing everybody from the get-go. I have to say that I'd recommend that people who are starting heteronormative relationships do some analysis of their relationship style and pattern and expectations at the beginning of their relationships. I mean, some of the things that I do with people who are non-monogamous or who are into kink and BDSM are really useful things. Because heteronormative folks usually don't ask any questions of each other because they believe that they already know. I call it the Disney box set, right? Mm-hmm. And we all lived happily ever after box set. It's on the shelf and it's got some stories in it and they come with expectations and rules and outcomes. And so people just jump into that without ever discussing things like priorities or, even the important bits like where would you be willing to live, right? Kind of basic, or do you want to have children?
Right. And then with child rearing itself, I mean, I think these are all conversations, that people don't have up front that then they have to confront later on. And they're already invested in the relationship and now Absolutely. They've got issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important. I mean, I tell people, it might seem weird to be having these conversations and about sex too, what you like, what's important to you, what your desires are. How important is sex to you? All of these things at the beginning, because if you've already invested in a relationship and you're mismatched, it's just much harder. Mm-hmm. It's dealable with, but it's just so much harder. It's so much easier if you're actually a good match for certain areas.
Well, and I have a question for you too. Like when you're working with a therapist, and I'm thinking about this like in the front end, and you're talking about, kind of setting expectations, and I'm thinking about the agreements you're talking about. Do therapists help the couples work through how to set those agreements, and then what to do if, like, say your agreement was you're only going to see your other relationship, 1 day a week, but now you want to see that person 2 days a week, and going back and like reshifting that, like that whole process, how does that work kind of in a therapy setting?
So, I mean, I work with people on creating the agreements, whatever those agreements are. I troubleshoot agreements with people. So, I'll say things like, don't be too prescriptive initially when you don't really know what it is. You haven't tried stuff yet. And so we can do some hard limits, and then we can do some areas where we might push it later on once we see how we're doing. And then making sure that people have agreement reviews regularly, that they're setting time aside to communicate regularly. And I mean, this stuff goes for all couples, like regular times to communicate about feelings. Really important. Not holding on to it. Also becoming really aware of what's my issue versus what's someone else's issue versus what's the issue of the couple. Like the fact that I now am so excited about this person that you agreed that I could see once a week, that I want to see them twice a week. That's a me issue. Mm-hmm. And so I have to think about, I'm so excited because at the beginning we call it new relationship energy, right? At the beginning of a relationship, our energy is totally different. We have different chemicals in our body, bonding chemicals, things like that. It's really exciting when you fall in love. That whole time period is really exciting, but that will pass, right? And then you've got existing relationship energy, which has its own wonders. And sometimes you want to kind of spice up the existing relationship. And sometimes it's about, yes, this new relationship is actually going to become something more solid, more of a partner than I thought. And so it's being very careful that my excitement doesn't communicate to my partner some sense of you're not good enough. I don't want you as much, and so getting people to stop, take a breath and think these things through before they put it on the table to renegotiate, because people will do it in 5 minutes. They've been dating somebody for 3 weeks and they want to see them all the time. And once a week doesn't feel like enough. It's like, okay, you need to be adult about this.
Mm-hmm. And so when a couple would come in, let's say for the first time, would you see them each separately and then together? And
Absolutely.
Then going forward, you see them together, but you want to like do an evaluation of each of them to see where they're at. And then maybe they want to say something privately or something.
Always, because I never know what the goals are until I see them privately. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell, I've been seeing people for 37 years. And I can't tell you how often it's been, apparently the couple were coming in order to fix a relationship or open up a relationship that was supposedly solid, for me to do an individual session with somebody to find out there was an affair that the other person doesn't know about.
What happens if you find out about an affair?
Well, so I have a rule about that. And my rule is, if I find out about an affair, you need to tell your partner, because I'm not going to hold your secret. And I'm clear about that, right? Mm-hmm. Like therapy is a place where honesty is essential. And so I start out with that before I see you alone, right? But it's really important that you're honest, because otherwise we get nowhere. So that's number one. But number two, if you've had an affair that you haven't told your partner about and you tell me about that, I'm not going to hold your secret. Because that will make it impossible for me to work with you as a couple, because then I'm part of that betrayal and I won't be that person. So if there's been an affair, you best fess up, because we're going to have to deal with it. And there's no such thing as the person will never find out, because they find out at some point anyway, because particularly if you're opening up, at some point, the partner who had an affair wants to talk about it. Right. So it's one of those things. I will just say, I'm not going to keep your secret for you. You're going to have to do something. And do you want me there, or do you want to do that on your own? And I give them that choice. That's
great. I just have one final question. Do you think that, or do you know, is the percentage of polyamorous or open relationships the same in like the LGBTQ community as it is in the heterosexual community?
There's been some suggestion that it's higher in the LGBTQ community, but part of that, I think, is the different ways in which we define relationships as well. I mean, if you think about the gay men's community, for example, there's a lot, for many years, there's been a lot of, open sex that happens in relationships. But they wouldn't necessarily consider themselves non-monogamous. It wouldn't be a label. Going down to the baths was not considered non-monogamy. It was just a fun activity you did. Mm-hmm. Right. And so I think part of trying to figure that out is that we have different labels still. I think, because the LGBTQ community tends to have different discussions about relationships, not as much anymore now that, marriage is equivalent across the board in most Western areas. But certainly when there wasn't gay marriage, the discussions about what our relationship will look like came about from the fact that the, box set options weren't there. So there wasn't like a standard progression. And so if you end up in more discussions about relationship style, you'll find that people make different choices and better choices for themselves. So from that perspective, maybe there may be more flexibility, but I certainly know enough gay people who are monogamous as the day is long, mm-hmm. And want nothing to do with non-monogamy. And I've worked with enough gay couples, gay and lesbian couples over time where, this has been the big issue as to whether we're monogamous or we're not monogamous. One person wanting the change and another person not. So, I also see these days, or in the last 10 years in particular, 10 to 15 years in particular, more LGBTQ folk than heteronormative folk, because I'm advertised as specializing in that. So.
And are you restricted? You sound like you're American or Canadian, but you live in the UK. Are you restricted to practicing or doing therapy only in the UK?
I have a coaching qualification, so I do coaching with Americans, as well as my psychology qualification. So nice. When I do any kind of psychotherapy, I'm doing that in the UK, but I do coaching with Americans.
Right.
Well, awesome. Well, Lori Beth, what is on the horizon for you? I mean, I know you said that you do this show. You've talked about blogging. You have a lot of, balls.
I have a lot of moving parts.
Yes, you do. Tell us about them. How can our listeners find all the great things you're involved in?
So the easiest way to find out what's going on is, my website is drloribethbisbey.com. I let people know on Instagram what I'm doing. So that's at Dr. Bisbey. I'm on TikTok at Lori Beth UK. I'm also on Twitter at Dr. Bisbey and Facebook, but I don't spend any time there. So you never know what's going on with me on Facebook. I've been for the last, year and a half touring the UK with a talk called The Psychology of Fetish and Kink. And I am continuing to do that and a couple of other ones on power dynamics and non-monogamy. I'm hoping to take that tour to the US. So keep your eyes open. I'm hoping we'll start on the West Coast and then see what happens. We're raising funds for that right now because I'm not planning those sorts of things. I don't plan this one. I do it for a company called Sea Talks, and they tell me where to show up and I show up. I'm hoping to do season 3 of Open House, The Great Sex Experiment. So we'll see. That's on Channel 4 in the UK. You can't see that in the US yet. Although people have told me they found ways. So I'm sure I'm not good. I'm not very good at the technology for that. I mean, those are the two main things I'm really looking forward to doing some more time in the U.S. I am going to be at Master Slave Conference in Maryland at the end of August. I'm speaking and doing a couple classes there. So anybody who participates in that lifestyle and wants to see me, it's a good place to come out and see me. That's Labor Day weekend. I'll be there. And I am back and forth to the U.S. quite a bit. Because that's where I came from. I've been here. This is my 34th year overseas. So.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because you don't have an accent, but then you say process instead of process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's because I was 27 when I came to the UK.
You picked up,
so I didn't pick up the accent, but I picked up various words and a couple of words different. Like I'll talk about my schedule. Right. And I say things, my girlfriend's in the US and she laughs at me because she picks up these little phrases that I say. I'll say something and she'll go, okay, that's a British one. And she'll start using it. It's really funny because I'm not aware of it. I'll just say something. And then it's like, oh, really? The other one I did the other day and I was like, okay, well, you just do this and then you do that. And then Bob's your uncle. And she was like,
what?
And it basically means 1, 2, 3 and you're done, right?
Right.
And I didn't even think about it. It's an old fashioned phrase. So I don't know where I picked it up, but I picked it up somewhere and I've been using it for more than 20 years. So, it's probably 30 years using that one. So I have no idea where I picked it up, but I was just like, or somebody will say, oh, did you enjoy that? I say, yeah, it was just grand.
Right.
Or it was brilliant. And people look at me like, where are you from?
And then you just something. I was with some British people recently and I just, I've watched enough of those shows. I'm like, something tragic happens. They just offer you a cup of tea. Your mom dies, have a cup of tea and put the kettle on and everything will be fine.
The first thing you do is put the kettle on.
Yeah.
But that's not so different than various American ethnic groups. Right? Yeah. Like how many people come from American backgrounds where there's a catastrophe going on and somebody's in the kitchen making food. You're hungry, you're gonna feed you, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
You
gotta eat. Somebody just died, but you better be eating.
You better be eating. But the thing that's different is in America, we actually talk about our feelings. In the UK, they make you the cup of tea, but don't expect you necessarily to talk about your feelings. The only people who are more modern talk about their feelings.
Wow. Well, Lori Beth, it has been so great to have you on today and super insightful. I actually was taking notes. I mean, like I'm a student at heart. I'm like trying to figure out like what I want to follow up and learn more all about, and certainly getting on your website, and we'll share all of your information on our show notes so our listeners can hear. But really, thank you again so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, and to all of our listeners out there, until our next episode, go out there and rock those relationships. If you liked what you heard, check out our show notes for resources from today's episode. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram under Rock That Relationship, and go to our website at rockthatrelationship.com for updated episodes and more great information.
Thanks for listening. Now go rock those relationships.